Perfect. We're just starting. Welcome, everyone, and hi. Welcome to our today's live event titled Overview of Community-Based Evaluation. This is hosted by the Center for Community-Based Research located in Waterloo, Ontario. My name is Sherry Rezvani, and I'm a researcher at the Center for Community-Based Research. I will be the moderator for today's session. This live event is an hour long. For the first half, our presenters will provide an overview of community-based evaluation and its importance in refugee sector. The second half is allocated to answering your questions, so please feel free to share your comments and questions in the chat box during or after the presentation. I will share your questions with the presenters in the last 20 to 30 minutes of this live event. I'm pleased today to introduce our presenters, Joanna Ochaka and Reed Jansen, co-executive directors at the Center for Community-Based Research. They have wealth of experience conducting community-based evaluation and research for over 20 years.
Thanks, Sherry. Thanks, Sherry, and welcome everyone. It's good to be here with you all. We want to give you a little bit of a background of where we're coming from. It might help give you some context for what we're about to discuss today. Joanna and I, we work at the Center for Community-Based Research, CCBR. It's a nonprofit organization in Waterloo, Ontario. We've been around for about 40 years, almost 40 years, having done about 400 projects. Our mission is to do research in an action-oriented and collaborative way, so that community members together can learn about how to build communities that are responsive and supportive, especially for those members who lack power and opportunity. We started off in the disability field, and since then we've worked on a range of social issues. We've done about 70 projects related to newcomers, including helping to launch some of Canada's first local immigration partnerships. More to the point for this crowd, we also work with former refugees and refugee claimants. We like to push the boundaries, looking for innovations. For example, we have a pilot project right now funded by the Federal Immigration Department, IRCC, on providing refugee newcomers with English language instruction in the workplace. And we're using a community-based approach to evaluation within that project. We know that some of you have had contact with us in the past, and perhaps some of you haven't. But for those of you who've had contact with us, maybe some of you have contacted us through this project.
Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for coming to this webinar. And this webinar is connected to the project, and you can see this is the current national project, which is focusing on building the capacity for groups who support refugee newcomers to do community-based evaluations. And this project, and you can see the website page, funded by IRCC, our federal government. This is Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, under the Service Delivery Improvement Program. So we've been implementing this project together with the Evaluation Capacity Network, which is located at the University of Alberta. And last year we went across Canada and we did a number of practical how-to workshop, and more than 300 people attended these workshops. Maybe some of you were there. If not, there is on this website, you can check out the 5 webinars on which review the workshop materials, so you can catch up with this topic already. We learned from the workshop participants that the workshop was very helpful. However, many people would like to hear more in-depth topics which could be explained better. We really wanted to respond to this next level of training by designing a series of these live events. this is our first webinar that we are doing today. And if you go to this website, you can see under Learn More the remaining events that will be happening after this one. So this is our website.
Yeah, and speaking of the website, here's the resources that you can find there. There's some introductory resources like videos, an evaluation readiness assessment tool, and information about ethics support. And then there's more substantive resources for those ready to go, like the workshops Joanna mentioned. The PowerPoint slides are up there, the webinars. There's mentors, there's a pool of mentors who can support people in community-based evaluation, and a new recently launched community of practice, which we'll talk about more towards the end of the webinar.
So we have 3 learning objectives for this webinar, and one is why it is important to evaluate refugee programs. What are the basics of community-based evaluation? And also how community-based evaluation fits with refugee program. So it should take us about 20-25 minutes. And the rest of the time will be open for discussion and your comments and back and forth information. So please feel free and use the chat box as we go. And if you have any comments or anything related to the topics we are going through, just make a note that we can go to these notes and talk about issues which are fresh in your mind.
So let's start with the basics as we talk about overview of community-based evaluation. We'll start by simply answering the question, why should we be talking about evaluating programs, refugee programs? Why is this important to do?
And let us start with a big picture, right? The global context. And this global context is so important to see the evaluation because of the numbers. Forced migration is not a reality that is going away in the world. The numbers of refugees in the world, this number is being rising. You can see that in 2018, 25.9 million people were forced to leave their countries. According to United Nations, it is about 49% compared to the year 2000. And half of those people are children. At the same time that the numbers are rising, there is a shift in the policies with some historic resettlement countries, like the United States, who is reducing the number of refugees that they are resettling. So there is a growing gap between the need for resettlement places and the actual number of places that people can go to.
For its part, Canada in recent years has bucked this trend and is accepting refugee newcomers. Last year, we surpassed the United States as the largest resettlement destination in the world. Even though we resettle only a very small portion of the world's refugees, about 30,000 or so last year, our targets continue to raise. So one argument for evaluating our resettlement efforts is simply because of rising numbers. We need to reflect and we need to learn on how best to support refugee newcomers as more come to build a new life in Canada. And the second reason relates to changing trends in refugee resettlement in Canada. Government-assisted refugees were once the most common stream for refugees to enter Canada. The Syrian influx changed that in favor of private sponsorship roughly quadrupling in the past 5 years. And throw in those new and smaller shared programs like the blended visa program, and today we have a different mix of refugee newcomers entering Canada. And so we need to reflect and learn how best to resettle people no matter how they arrive.
So this is a lot of good reasons to talk about evaluating refugee programs. Another one is there's a gap that needs to be filled because, surprisingly, few refugee program evaluations are happening or being published or being shared. Very different situation is in other sectors in our society where regular evaluation is expected and it's published. Evaluation that has been done in the past are often sporadic, piecemeal, or largely expert-based. So not a community-based approach that we are talking about this webinar today. Also, there are very few tools for measuring resettlement outcomes. Most evaluation of refugee programs will use a very similar type of outcomes for refugee newcomers and other immigrant outcomes. So just to say, there is a need to do more evaluations. There is a need to focus on measuring outcomes related to refugees. And this type of discussion like today is so important. And we are happy to have it. And thank you very much again. And we are very glad that you came for this discussion.
So if evaluation is important in the refugee resettlement sector, let's shift to talking about how we do that. And today we want to focus on a community-based approach to evaluation. So we'll start first by describing this approach in general before we connect this approach to the evaluation of refugee programs.
So let us start with the definition of evaluation, and this is one of many. Just to be on the same page together and to know what we really mean by the word evaluation. When you read this definition of the evaluation, you can see that there are many different key points in this definition. First, that the evaluation is organized. So it means that it's systematic in how it collects information, like other research does. It has a method. It has method. It could be concerned about the activities of the program and how these activities are being implemented. This is the process of the program. But it could be also concerned with the impacts that result because of these activities, the outcomes of the program, or with both of them. It is an assessment of effectiveness. So the scope could be different, could be on individual level programs or whole organization or even the community at large or some systems. But in addition, in this definition, we can see that evaluation has also focused on future. And really, this definition says evaluation helps to improve programs. This is a very important point, and the point that doing evaluation is one thing, but also using the evaluation results are so important in evaluating programs.
So organizations might have different reasons or different motivations for doing evaluation. Many evaluations are reactive in response to funder expectations for accountability. Here we do evaluation because we have to. But evaluation can also be proactive. We do it because we want to. We want to learn to improve our organization. We want to learn to improve our programs. Or maybe we want evaluation results as a kind of a talking partner as we adapt to complex situations when we're developing innovation. And so here we're back again to that point about doing evaluation and using evaluation results. And we think that you're more likely to find evaluation meaningful if we find the evaluation is useful.
So a community-based approach right? What this exactly means and how best to do that, right? So today we are talking about a community-based approach to evaluation. And the point is that this is not simple a method used in evaluation, but this is really an approach, a way of being within an evaluation. And this approach is very familiar to us as Center for Community-Based Research. And it really means that evaluation is done a little bit differently that may be typical evaluations being taught or being implemented in many places. So the question is, how is community-based evaluation different from other approaches to evaluation? So our answer is really a code, the answer is coded in the numbers. So we would like to unpack 4 numbers for you to remember how this approach to evaluation differs from other approaches. And the numbers are 3, 3, 4, and 11. You can also see, this is this screenshot of our website of the Center for Community-Based Research. And just we recently changed our website and really were looking for the picture that could give the image of community-based approach. So I don't know that you see that or not, but let's talk about 3, 3, 4, 11 first.
So we'll start with the first number 3, which is 3 hallmarks. What are the distinguishing features of community-based research? And you see 3 of them there: stakeholder-driven, participatory, and action-oriented. That evaluation strives to be those 3 things. Stakeholder-driven, that's where we're asking the question, who has a stake in this particular evaluation, and how do we meaningfully involve them and allow them to be in the driver's seat of the evaluation. The evaluation needs to be practically relevant to them, and it's driven by that particular program's or organization's unique theory of change. Participatory, this is about involving people, about engaging people, making sure that the research process is involving the different stakeholder groups throughout the process, from conceptualization and developing the evaluation framework towards the implementation and dissemination and recommendations at the end. Third hallmark is action-oriented. This is about that point that Joanna was making about that future looking. It's not just about understanding the current, it's about having useful results that will make some sort of change and improve the program in some way. And if you look at these 3 hallmarks, they each link to different global research traditions. The stakeholder-driven really links strongly to the indigenous research tradition with its emphasis on self-determination. The participatory hallmark connects with the participatory research tradition of the Global South, and the action-oriented connects with the action research tradition of the Global North.
So 3 hallmarks, and right now the second 3 is 3 goals of community-based evaluation. And this is why the number 3 is so important. This is not only one goal to do evaluation and learn from evaluation, produce some knowledge. This is the first goal, which we call learning together, and really gaining new insights by doing the systematic evaluation research. So there is knowledge production in that, but also an importance of rigor in achieving this goal. There is also additional goal in community-based approach to evaluation, which is about sharing results, this action orientation, right? And making sure that the results of the evaluation are communicated with other people who want to learn from that, and people who want to be enabled to act and use this information. So this is this knowledge mobilization and communication aspect that is also important goal in addition to knowledge production. community-based evaluation has one more goal, which really is about building stronger relationships among people who are doing evaluation and people who will be using the evaluation. So engaging people by building relationship, equipping them in this process to make sure that the evaluation results will be used. So stakeholder mobilization, which is very much about facilitation of these processes.
So that's more kind of the theoretical parts of community-based research. How do you practically do it? And here we get to the last two numbers, the 4 and the 11. There's 4 phases. And if you add up those little bullet points on this slide, you'll get 11 nonlinear steps. So there's 4 phases, unlike traditional research, which emphasizes phase 2 and 3 of evaluation, planning, and information gathering and analysis. Community-based research also adds a phase 1 up front, the engagement phase of laying the foundation, getting stakeholders involved, being clear on what you're doing, and also a phase 4, which is the acting on the findings. Another point to note on this slide, you see that each phase has a relational and a technical aspect to it. The technical is that systematic part. Evaluation is research, and so there are some steps that you need to be doing. But the relational part is that reminder of that facilitation aspect of community-based approaches. Another point to just to highlight is that feedback loop between phase 2 and phase 3, that changes can be made based on what you're learning through the evaluation, and you can, in community-based approaches, adapt and change your evaluation plan. And then the last part I would just want to emphasize on this slide is that arrow between phase 4, acting on findings, and phase 1, laying the foundation. That you can think about community-based evaluations as cycles, going through these 4 phases and going through these 4 phases in cycles over time. So that one evaluation cycle doesn't have to do everything, that it can be a part of a bigger plan for evaluation. I lied. I'm just going to emphasize one other thing on the slide, and then there you see again that distinction between doing evaluation and using evaluation. That in a community-based approach, you're thinking about both all the time. You're thinking about how do we do this evaluation very well, and to get good evidence, good results. But how can we do this evaluation in such a way that will increase the likelihood that the results will actually be used and implemented?
So how to do that practically, right? What are the strategies that we can implement to see that this approach is community-based? So we, on this slide, you have few of them, right? And one, the most important, all our evaluations, which are community-based evaluations, have a steering committee groups to guide and to be really a consciousness of the project. So one of the tasks will be to come up with the group of cross-stakeholder, a small group of cross-stakeholder perspectives, people who will have this perspective and facilitating this group. Another practical strategy will be to have a diversity in terms of the research team. There are researchers, but also the research team should include people with lived experience, people who have hands-on experience related to the programs, and really making sure that they are included well and with training and support, and making sure that they really contribute equally to the whole research work. Another strategy is ongoing training and support, making sure that everyone is equipped to be engaged in engagement, but also in the research or evaluation research. And this type of training and support is incremental, happening in the ongoing way. Community forums, feedback events, very common way to gather everyone to talk and share the results of the evaluations, but also verify them and think future, prioritize some solutions and what will make sense to the program or to the organization, and making sure that this type of feedback events are happening. Clear and creative summaries. This is very important also to write and craft very digestible summaries, visual or creative, because this type of writing will really be an inspiration for people to act or to do something for the future, and planning future actions, deciding on responses that will be towards the evaluation funding, and determining next steps, what should happen, and the cycles that Rich was talking about.
So just to summarize this segment, you could think about the opposite of community-based approaches, and sometimes we think about expert-based as being that opposite, where the expert-based being more where individuals or people come in from outside of the group and prescribe the way to do the evaluation, versus a community-based approach, which see the expertise as a collective expertise already within the program or the organization.
Just to summarize everything, and I think I am this definition person on this presentation, so I have another definition, which is defining a community-based approach as an approach that involves active participation of stakeholders, those whose lives are affected by the issue being studied, in all phases of research, for the purpose of producing useful results to make positive changes. So this definition could be helpful, again, to make the point that a community-based approach to evaluation means not to give a control of the evaluation agenda. There's stakeholders who have the control of all processes and results.
So in the last few minutes before we start the discussion, let's briefly talk about how community-based evaluation fits with refugee programs. And we'll kick off this segment by answering this question with 4 reasons. Maybe in the discussion we'll find other reasons. So how does community-based evaluation fit with refugee programs?
So first, and the first layer of thinking is that really there is a congruency between values of community-based research as well as programs for refugees. So this is the example of 5 values that we have been writing about in the previous research, and that probably many of you, service providers or recipients of the programs, can relate to, because they are very similar, how the programs are implemented and how community-based evaluation is granted.
Both community-based evaluation and resettlement practice are sensitive to vulnerability. Vulnerability often comes with forced migration. There's sometimes precarious legal status of refugee newcomers. There can be unequal power relationships between newcomers and practitioners and researchers. And there can be legitimate mistrust of authorities, for example. In response, many resettlement workers aspire to trauma-informed practice, and trauma-informed training is becoming increasingly common in the field. Community-based evaluation is also concerned with being trauma-informed and dealing with vulnerability. And you can see some of the strategies on the screen in which researchers can be sensitive to trauma and vulnerability.
Refugee experience of forced migration is unlike from other migrants. And one sociologist at York University, his name is Kyriakides, talks about the self-rescue story of refugee newcomers as they resettle and think about life beyond refuge. there is the importance of regaining the ability to feel eligible to exist and the ability to act. So this is very important way of thinking how we can support and reinforce the rescue story of people who came to Canada. And community-based approach to evaluation, it's trying to really support this rescue story by different types of strategy. For example, giving voice to refugees by listening and capturing their life experiences, but also community-based approach evaluation builds capacity for many of them to start to be researchers, or they were in the past lives researchers, but builds this capacity to be researchers and to be active citizens. And this evaluation also provides opportunity to build new, better, more effective programs and better and more effective supports to all newcomers, including refugees.
And so finally, community-based evaluation is attuned to community ethics. It's concerned with doing no harm and maximizing benefits like all research should, but it has some built-in strategies that we talked about earlier that can serve as an extra ethical check. And so we talked about the regular steering committee meetings that not only do they guide the evaluation, but they can also be like an ongoing ethics committee where some of the ethical issues that might arise can be discussed. We also talked about community researchers, people with lived experience that can be trained and to do evaluation research, but they also bring that lived experience of understanding of where potential harm could be lying, even if it's unintentional harm. And finally, there's always ethical reviews that can be done before the evaluation starts. If you're part of a university, of course, you need to do that through your research ethics office board. But if you're not part of a university, our CCBR, our organization, we created the Community Research Ethics Office. It's its own nonprofit organization now, and its mission is to do ethical reviews for community-based evaluation and community-based research. And so anybody can use that. It's all volunteer-driven, so it's very cheap. It uses the 3 core principles of the Tri-Council, so the respect for persons, concern for welfare, and concern for justice, and it adds a 4th core principle of respect for community, making sure that there's no community level harm and that there are benefits at the community level as well.
Perfect. Thank you for engaging the presentation, Rich and Joanna. Just to let the audience know that a recorded version of this live event will be available and will be shared on our website at evalforrefugee.ca. And now it's the time for our question and answer period. So feel free to post your questions, comments, experiences on the chat box. Feel free to use it, and we try to get to as many questions as possible in the remaining time. All right, so we have the first question. Could you share some examples of digestible written and/or oral summaries of research that you have created or seen?
Sure, I can start, and Joanna, you can carry on. So most evaluations, because we're in Canada, most evaluations do have a report of some kind, so more of a report that summarizes everything. But usually, in addition to that, we have other types of communications that come out of our evaluations. More common is to have some sort of infographics that are still capturing the fullness of the evaluation reports, but done so in a more graphic kind of a way, just the high level kind of findings. We also have in the past used theater as a way to report back on findings, where we've commissioned theater groups to engage with our stakeholders to demonstrate the findings in a different way than a written format or in an oral format. So that's 2 examples. I don't know, Joanna, if you want to add more to that.
Just I am thinking about this community forums or meetings, open meetings, bringing people who are the heart of the evaluation to present and to share their learnings from the evaluations in the way that it's simple, but also in the way that you can talk to anyone about it. So I think that the trick is to write or to present in the way that you can speak to your neighbor or your child or your spouse who doesn't know anything about this evaluation in the way that is intelligent and making sense. So this is the way to challenge ourselves to be concise, but also to be creative, to give examples or to illustrate the points, as well as allowing people to digest information, ask questions, and go back and forth in terms of clarifying evaluation results.
Amazing. Thanks, Rich and Joanna, for answering this question. So I can see another comment there. Okay, let's read it. Engagement during COVID-19 has some limitations. Are your firms being considered as well aware of how the new normal would be impacting the community response to health issues regarding vulnerable communities? Thanks for posing this question. Rich and Joanna, I get back to you.
So maybe I will start this. So this is really difficult and different, right? So difficult because we know how to engage when we are face-to-face with people, and the strategy that we're talking, steering committee or forums or different types of teams and working together are much more difficult in our current unusual times. But I think that we are adjusting and trying to use, like today, this type of ways to communicate and have this still dialogue together, plus to keep our relationships alive, because this is so important to keep these relationships alive. So engagement is more difficult, however, it's even more important than before. So creativity and online moments should be often organized and because they help.
Yeah, difficult, absolutely unusual, absolutely. Creativity is, kind of needing to happen. We in our evaluations that we're involved in right now, we're noticing the creativity of the groups, the initiatives that we're supporting their evaluation, and seeing their creativity and how they are re-engaging their members, whether that's direct service providers or whether that's more of a community level organizations that are making community level change. And so that we also need to then kind of latch on to how they're being creative in doing their engagement and adding the evaluation piece into that mix of creativity of using online versions of ways of gathering information, ways of summarizing the information and feeding back. Our steering committees, of course, now are all online, our Zoom meetings. We've had training for different projects which needed people with lived experience in gathering information as researchers. So we've had online training sessions. So there's a lot of adaptability. Definitely more challenging, but there's just I'm amazed at the creativity that people who have lived and breathed building community and community engagement all their lives. They're trying to find ways to keep that doing and not just going into pause.
This is going back to these 5 values of congruency between programs and community-based evaluations. So it's difficult to evaluate programs which don't exist anymore or starting to exist in completely different format, but also, like Rich is saying, striving to do it as well as possible and not giving up. I think it's the principle.
Amazing. Thanks for the explanations, Rich and Joanna. We have another question posed. Are we evaluating this gathering of information regarding this new challenge as well? Here is a link to a university project which included the webinar as a CBR in a new future. That's by Sherry. And we have another one. Human and financial resources are the main setbacks for conducting the refugee program evaluation. Any tips about how can organizations overcome this?
Maybe I'll just say thanks to Sherry for providing that link. Yeah, like I like your encouragement to be reflective, to evaluate how we are changing our ways of doing research and evaluation as we're learning how to do that. So that's great. Look forward to seeing what's in that link.
To answer the second question is really true. Resources, human resources and funding, it always was there above the biggest barriers to conduct good evaluations, how to overcome them. And creativity, but also partnerships. Partnerships is always a good way, to have partners who can be helpful. And it takes really a group of people to creatively bring some resources to the organizations for evaluations, as well as good people who feel that evaluation is important and they push for it.
Yeah, and LTAG, that's that is a big challenge. We often talk about that in order to get any type of community-based research project, including evaluation, you really need to do three things. You need to have a good idea of what you want to evaluate and how to evaluate that. You need the right partners, the stakeholders together at the table, and you need resources, funding, to be able to do that. And it's a bit of a juggling of those three balls as you're trying to launch off an evaluation project. And usually it's the ball of the funding resources that drops. It's easier to have, yeah, we want to do evaluation. We have a good idea for how to do evaluation. We've got the right players in place, but where are the resources? And this is very common for us at CCBR. I just yesterday had an email from a group who wants to do evaluation, reached out and said, let's get together. We know exactly what we want to do in our evaluation. We've done a lot of preparatory work, and we wanted to bump this up to the next level and quite a sophisticated level. This is within refugee programs. But we want to explore with you how we can do that. How can we resource that? And so there's no simple answer to that. There's different types of funding pockets that are available for different types of research, or finding sponsors to sponsor some of your evaluation and research. So it's a creative exploration that we have with our community groups.
And just to add to these three balls that Rich was talking about, there's sometimes also lack of a culture of evaluation in organizations. So sometimes programs want to evaluate themselves or do improvements, and not all the levels of the human resources in the organization are together. So this is also important part to build this culture of evaluation in your organizations, to have the support from different levels, and really to push for these evaluations together as a group.
Amazing, thank you. So great sources are being shared on the chat box, so make sure you don't miss them. Sherry shared a survey which is about communicating with family and friends during COVID-19, a survey from the Multilingual Families Lab at the University of Alberta. And there is a link if you would like to check it out. And I'm happy that you're sharing your challenges. We're more than happy to answer. your questions. So we get to the first one. One challenge we have in doing evaluation at our organization is that the person providing the service sometimes need to go through survey questions with the client because they are the only one who has the language capacity to support the client. Any suggestions for the best practices in this situation?
Sherry, you could answer this question, right? Because you have been doing an evaluation right now with, people speaking different languages, right? And challenge around that.
Yeah, for sure. So from my perspective and from my experience, we normally consider the second language or the third language, and we try, for example, for the surveys that we normally develop, we have it as the first or main language is English, and we normally have like a second survey which is in French. So French speaking population can also share their opinions, or in cases that there are few people that they speak like a third language, if we have access to resources that there's a person who speaks that language, we normally involve them as the researchers in order to conduct the surveys or facilitate the survey completion. So yeah, that's probably the approach taken. Is there anything else that Joanna would like to add or reach?
Yes, I just wanted to add that everything is about this learning together and building capacity how to do evaluations well, right? So training is part of the evaluation process. So if you have this kind of situations that there is staff person only who can communicate about evaluation or gather information from people, this person needs to be trained in the method. The person needs to know how to conduct this interview and make sure that the data is gathered and transferred in the most ethical ways. So some training is needed, and this is fantastic to have additional people working with the research team and making sure that the evaluation is very done in the way that people understand and can provide information into evaluation.
Amazing. Thanks, Joanna. And we have another challenge faced by one of the attendees, and I'm going to read out loud so we can get to that one as well. A challenge we have faced is getting response from certain types of sponsors, while people who do a sponsorship of someone they don't know have a fairly high level of response. Those who are sponsoring, their family members seem less interested in responding, and so our response rate is significantly lower. Do you have suggestions on how to get a higher response rate for people who are connected to the people they settle so that we can understand their experience better? They are an important part of the settlement and integration, but we don't understand them as well.
Good question, Brian. Response rates is always a challenge. And I'm assuming that you're talking about surveys here as the method, the way of gathering information, and response rates are always can be a challenge for surveys. Surveys are one method. Maybe I just answer the question by saying that surveys are one method of gathering people's input and perspectives. It's a good breadth method. You're able to get a lot of people, in a fairly short amount of time. But it's also probably one of the least engaging types of methods because it's a little bit more has more of a distance. So part of my response about response rates would be to think about other methods, in addition to surveys that are a little bit more engaging, or that delve a little bit deeper into the issues. Methods like individual interviews. Your response rate goes up if you ask people individually, right? And if you purposely sample some people, you can get that. In terms of survey responses, maybe I'll turn that over to you, Joanna, since you just did a massive survey responses. Yes. You can answer about survey response rates.
See, this is not an easy thing, to do surveys these days, and especially on sensitive topics and with people who haven't been engaged in research maybe yet, right? So we have done just recently 4 evaluations about pilot projects which are using only digital ways of connecting with refugee, and they are really not having any face-to-face interactions. And here we are coming, researchers, to do an evaluation with this type of not very connected group online, right? And response rates are not huge. So I think we need to always think about the context of our study and also about strategies, how we can engage this population, how we can tell this population that taking part in this survey will help to do things better in the future. So this is about motivation, right? We don't want to respond to surveys or random things, and this is so many of that, in our face. So thinking what really, and to be truly with that after, how we can see the results of the evaluation benefiting people that we are asking to respond to our questions. So this is this kind of trick, right? And you need to do some thinking and maybe some engagement even before you will have this response rate higher. Did I answer the question? That will be the question, my question.
That was indeed very helpful. Thanks, Joanna and Rich. So I can see that Brian is typing. So others, please feel free to ask your questions. This is the time that we can go through them and get as many as possible answered.
If we can.
Maybe as people are thinking, Sherry, if it's okay, just to go to some what's next beyond this this webinar, how people can stay connected. We're really try to build a community of people who think about community-based approaches to evaluation, and one way to stay connected is through our community of practice. Sherry is kind of leading that, and she can talk a little bit more about that, that we're launching, so that these kind of conversations in the refugee resettlement sector, but beyond, can grapple and share some best practices, some challenges, and what you're learning, and how to do this approach to evaluation. We also have a next live event coming up on June 17th. That one is going to be focusing more on phase 2, that planning. How do you plan for good data collection and analysis? How do you implement good data collection and data analysis? That was one of the big things that out of our workshops, we heard that people liked the overview, but they wanted to know a little bit more about the nuts and bolts about how you go about gathering information. What are the different types of methods? What are the different ways of sampling? When do you sample? When do you need a random sample? When don't you need a random sample? How do you get response rates?
That's right. This is what I wanted to add.
Yeah, response rates. When are you concerned about response rates? When you're not? All of those kinds of things. So our partners at the University of Alberta, the Evaluation Capacity Network, Jason and Rebecca will be leading that live event. So you can sign up for that. We have all the webinars that are basically a short form of our workshop material that we did across the country last year. They're up online. And then this project also has customized support, and this is the kind of the neat thing of having a fundable capacity building project like IRCC funded in this evaluating refugee programs. And so the Evaluation Capacity Network at U of A, as well as our center, Joanna and I, are available for customized support. So you can call us up, email us, and we have some time for coaching your organization and group. And we're building a mentorship pool. So people who do community-based evaluation across the country, if you go to our website, you can see some of those mentors that are already there. They're willing to help. You can see what type of arrangements. Some of them are fee-for-service, some of them are volunteer, some of them are university-based, some of them are community-based. Most of them have taken or been part of our workshops, and and have an understanding of community-based evaluation, so you can access those types of customized support.
Yes, and also consider yourself as a mentor. Because I am sure many people who are coming to this type of gatherings have a lot of expertise and a lot of capacity. So becoming a member is also an important role that some of us can play.
Thanks, Joanna. Just to read out loud the comment from Brian. Thanks, it's about surveys, but at times when we reach out to set up interviews, they're not interested. What you said is helpful though, helping people understand how there would be a long-term benefit in their response. For sure, there are challenges in conducting focus groups, interviews, and surveys, but I'm sure there are ways that we can overcome this. And yeah, and Sherry also mentioned mentors are great, and that really help. Yeah, on our website at evalforrefugee.ca, if you would like to sign up to become a mentor and help others in evaluations, please check it out. And yeah, we'll be happy to get in touch.
And also to say, excuse me, that next webinar is about gathering and analyzing methods and pluses, minuses, all these different things to consider. So maybe this is a little bit, more focused on this type of questions, a webinar that can be unpacking this type of challenges a little bit more.
Great. Rich, you wanted to share something?
No, I think I'm good. I think Joanna summarized nicely.
Okay.
All right, great.
We are in very different places, so we don't talk to each other, easily, directly. So I'm glad that this is working.
I also see the time and that the hour is up, so
yeah.
I think we need to wrap up here.
For sure. Thank you so much, Rich and Joanna, and thanks for everyone who attended our live event. And I would like to encourage you to please take 2 minutes after this live event to share your feedback with us. So once you log out of the webinar, the feedback form on the SurveyMonkey will appear automatically, and you can share your feedback with us, and we can use that in order to provide more relevant and quality support for your evaluation. And don't forget to continue this discussion at our open group at settlenet.org. Find our Equipping for Community-Based Evaluation group, join, and let's continue this discussion. And I would like to thank our wonderful presenters, Joanna and Rich, for today's session, and all of you for joining us. And stay tuned for upcoming live events, activities, and much more. And check out our website at evalforrefugee.ca. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.